There's a genuinely brief moment in a recent interview, lasting maybe 15 seconds and delivered almost as a passing aside, that ended up generating considerably more controversy this week than anything Meghan herself had actually planned or anticipated.
I had dinner with Meghan Markle the other night. Well, she was at the same table. So I can't say, she wasn't my guest. We were both guests at a dinner party in California. And she had just gotten back from the palace. And I think I didn't talk to her really more than to say a couple words, but I know she was talking.
Martha Stewart, asked casually about a dinner party, mentioned she'd recently been at the same table as Meghan. Not as her guest, she clarified, just seated nearby, shortly after Meghan had returned from a visit to the palace. Stewart's specific phrasing was almost throwaway. Meghan had been talking about the trip and hadn't exactly kept it private. That single offhand comment ended up setting off a genuine chain of events worth walking through carefully and in order tonight. Because underneath the immediate, fairly loud online reaction sits a considerably more interesting story about competing narratives, a birthday celebration that apparently didn't unfold as originally planned, and a house listing that arrived at a very specific and genuinely notable moment. Let's start with Martha Stewart's comment itself, because I think it deserves more careful handling than the instant reaction it generated online.
Trying to make us believe that Martha Stewart was lying. A source close to Meghan saying that Martha must have been confused because the pair were not seated next to one another.
Stewart, speaking in what sounded like a fairly casual, unscripted moment, suggested Meghan had discussed her recent palace visit somewhat openly at that dinner. A detail that stood out specifically because the Highgrove meeting had reportedly been kept deliberately private, with minimal public detail released by either side. Almost immediately, a source reportedly close to Meghan pushed back through the Daily Mail, suggesting Stewart may have simply been confused. That Meghan had been asked generally about her European travels, given a brief, unremarkable answer, and that nothing more detailed than that had actually been said. Here's where I want to pause and be genuinely fair to both possibilities, because this is exactly the kind of dispute where certainty in either direction isn't really warranted.
Martha Stewart has way more street cred than Meghan Markle, but Meghan Markle continues to rip off Martha Stewart, and it seems Martha Stewart's had enough. At a certain point, you say, "Uncle, I'm done."
Martha Stewart has spent decades building a public reputation around straightforward, often blunt commentary. That's a real established pattern worth noting. It's also entirely possible that a passing comment at a crowded dinner party genuinely got misremembered or slightly exaggerated in the retelling, the way casual conversations often do once they're repeated secondhand. Neither account has been independently verified beyond the two competing versions themselves, and treating either side's account as automatically more credible than the other isn't something the available evidence actually supports. It's worth pausing on why this specific dispute matters at all, given how genuinely minor the underlying content actually is. A passing comment about a dinner conversation, nothing scandalous or damaging in either version. I think the reason it caught fire has less to do with the actual substance and more to do with what it represents symbolically.
Can't even hold it together in an interview with 7-year-olds. But no wonder Meghan is having a collapse because Martha Stewart's turned on her this week, so too has Oprah Winfrey, both on video. And now the house has just found its way onto a real estate website. They're quietly quitting Montecito because they cannot afford it.
Another small data point in an ongoing, much larger argument about whether Meghan's public statements can generally be trusted at face value. That's a genuinely significant context to hold on to as we move through the rest of tonight's story, because it explains why even minor disputes like this one generate outsized reactions. What's genuinely interesting, though, isn't really which specific version turns out to be technically accurate. It's the sheer speed and intensity of the public reaction favoring Stewart's account almost immediately and near unanimously, with genuinely very little willingness extended toward the competing explanation, even though neither account has actually been independently verified beyond the word of the people involved. That reaction itself tells you something about where public trust currently sits, regardless of what actually happened at that specific table.
But, yeah, like, keep a good heart when you're bullying your sister-in-law who's about to battle cancer. Keep a good heart when you're snubbing and secretly recording your own father who has just lost half his leg in a Filipino hospital. Oh, yeah, keep a good heart when you're bullying the late Queen Elizabeth II on an international scale while accusing her of racism. Piss off.
If this kind of careful breakdown interests you, the like button genuinely helps this channel keep digging into stories that deserve more nuance than the loudest online reaction usually allows for. It's also worth genuinely acknowledging Martha Stewart's own specific position here, because I think it adds useful context to how her comment should probably be weighed. Stewart is someone with a genuinely long, well-documented public career built substantially on directness and a lack of interest in carefully managing every public statement for maximum diplomatic safety. That's part of what's made her such a durable and recognizable public figure across decades. That established pattern lends her account a certain baseline credibility that a less established, less consistently blunt public figure might not automatically receive in a similar dispute. It doesn't make her account automatically correct, but it's a genuinely fair piece of context worth including.
She left the royal family, but she still wants to call herself the Duchess of Sussex to sell her products, even though I think she spent like 5 hours in Sussex in total in her whole life. And she still wants to portray herself as close to King Charles and Camilla. That is just not the case. Now, they're going back with their tails between their legs because they have this huge judgment from the lawsuit, and they're probably broke as a joke. Okay, they're 1 minute away from bankruptcy, but nonetheless, I'm not surprised that Meghan Markle is going around this party.
Now, let's move to something that generated its own separate and genuinely distinct wave of public skepticism this week: the specific story involving jam and cookies. According to reporting picked up by several outlets, Meghan reportedly described dipping Girl Scout Thin Mint cookies into her own as ever raspberry jam as a personal favorite treat. That detail spread quickly, and the reaction split fairly predictably along existing lines. Some outlets ran it as a charming, relatable lifestyle moment. Plenty of commentators online treated it with open skepticism, questioning whether the specific pairing was genuine personal preference or simply another opportunity to connect her commercial brand to something culturally familiar and beloved. I want to be honest here. This is a genuinely minor detail in the grand scheme of things, and I don't think it deserves the outsized reaction it generated either way. People have unusual, specific food preferences constantly, and there's nothing inherently implausible about someone genuinely enjoying that particular combination. What's more interesting than the cookie pairing itself is what the reaction reveals: that at this point, essentially any lifestyle content connected to her commercial brand gets read through a lens of skepticism first, genuine curiosity second, regardless of how small or plausible the detail actually is.
Hi, I'm Megan.
And I'm Alyssa.
And look how much she is annoyed by the 7-year-olds. And look how she had to, as Nancy pointed out, get the Duchess of Sussex in there. What happened to executive producer? Also, look at the way she shoots daggers at the girls when it's their turn. Yes, she's looking that way at the 7-year-olds, and I'll show you more of that in just one moment. But this Cookie Queen's campaign is going to fail because, unfortunately, Meghan Markle is using it to try and sell her jam.
There's a broader pattern worth naming here too, one that extends well beyond just this specific cookie detail. Lifestyle brands generally rely heavily on personal, seemingly authentic anecdotes to build genuine consumer connection. That's standard practice across the entire industry, not something unique or uniquely suspicious about Meghan's specific approach. The skepticism directed at this particular detail probably says less about the cookie pairing itself being implausible, and considerably more about a general erosion of trust that now colors how any personal anecdote connected to her brand gets received by a meaningfully skeptical portion of the audience, regardless of how ordinary or plausible the specific claim actually is on its own merits.
All of a sudden, she has had this dawning realization about the fact that the public have turned on her. And the public have turned on her, of course, because she perpetuated Meghan Markle's lies. And that's the reason why we're seeing this attempt to rewrite history with the Vanity Fair interview last week, where she finally tried to justify that.
Now here's where things get genuinely more consequential and considerably more interesting, because a real estate listing surfaced this week that raised legitimate, fair questions genuinely worth examining properly rather than dismissing outright. The Montecito property Meghan and Harry reportedly live in appeared, according to multiple reports, on a real estate-focused publication, with specific mention of recent updates to the kitchen and other details typically included when a property is being prepared for potential sale. No formal listing has been confirmed publicly, and it's worth being clear that appearing in coverage isn't the same as an active, confirmed sale. That said, the specific timing and framing did raise a fair question that several commentators picked up on.
I would light a candle for Meghan Markle's birthday, but I have no wick. So I won't be lighting a candle for your 45th birthday because you sold me a wickless candle, you bimbo, and you don't know how to run a business.
Why would a private residence's interior updates be covered in this kind of publication at all, absent some connection to a potential future sale or valuation process? That's a genuinely reasonable question to ask, even while acknowledging that the answer remains unconfirmed. It's entirely possible this reflects routine real estate industry coverage of a notable property rather than any imminent sale. But it's also fair to note that this specific kind of coverage doesn't typically appear without some underlying connection to the market. It's worth adding one more layer of fairness to the house story before moving on, because real estate coverage of high-profile properties happens fairly regularly, independent of any actual sale process. Publications covering notable homes sometimes do so purely because of general reader interest in seeing how a well-known property has been updated or maintained, without that coverage necessarily signaling anything about the owner's actual intentions to sell. That's a genuinely plausible alternative explanation worth holding onto alongside the more suspicious reading, even if the timing here does feel notable, given everything else happening around this family simultaneously.
It's just like, Meghan, if you had a heart, you'd speak to your dad. You know, if you had a heart, you wouldn't have done that to Prince Philip. If you had a heart, you wouldn't have done that to Elizabeth II. Do you know what I mean? The strategy is whack.
Stay with me here, though, because this next part of tonight's story is genuinely where things shift from speculation into something with real, actual reported sourcing behind it. And depending on how much weight you personally give it, it might reshape how you're reading everything we've covered so far tonight. According to reporting from industry newsletter Naughty But Nice, sourced to Rob Shooter, there are reportedly internal discussions happening around whether Harry and Meghan should issue some form of public apology as part of a broader effort to rebuild trust with the royal family following the recent Highgrove meeting.
You can't just, get the questions and craft an answer that sounds good and think people are going to buy it. We live in a completely different age now with technology, and so much has been said and talked about with Meghan. The consumer is a lot more, attuned to, the kind of person Meghan is. And
according to that reporting, the conversation isn't about a blanket admission of wrongdoing across every interview, documentary, or book. It's reportedly about acknowledging the pain caused by years of public estrangement, without requiring a full retraction of everything previously said. I want to treat this report with appropriate caution because it's sourced to a single outlet citing anonymous insiders, which is a genuinely common but inherently limited form of sourcing in celebrity and royal journalism. It's entirely plausible this reflects real internal conversations happening at some level. It's also entirely plausible this is speculative framing dressed up as insider reporting, which happens constantly in this specific media space. Worth noting for context, when Harry was previously asked directly about the language in his statement following the Daily Mail court loss, he reportedly stood firmly behind every word of it, which is at least some indication of his general posture toward walking back previous public statements. Though a single instance doesn't necessarily predict future flexibility on a different specific issue.
the fact that they were saying that you don't have to apologize or walk back everything that you've done. Well, yeah, you do. Like, that didn't even make sense to me, Dan. First of all, yes, you have to say that you made the mistakes, not that the past 5 years or whatever, 6 years have caused enormous pain. That is complete nonsense.
The same reporting outlet separately claimed something else worth including, because it adds real texture to the broader picture, that Meghan had reportedly originally hoped for a considerably larger, more high-profile 45th birthday celebration, potentially involving a substantial guest list of prominent friends, but that the plan reportedly didn't come together as hoped, with scheduling conflicts and shifting relationships cited as contributing factors. The actual celebration that reportedly took place appears to have been considerably smaller and more private than what was apparently originally envisioned. I want to be fair here too, because there's a genuinely reasonable alternative explanation available. Large, elaborate celebrity gatherings are logistically difficult to coordinate under the best of circumstances. Conflicting schedules among genuinely busy, high-profile people are a real and common obstacle, regardless of anyone's personal relationships or reputation.
Meghan Markle, she had her 45th birthday yesterday, and the royals said not one word. Not one word. Now, the royals will typically celebrate other senior members of the family when it's their birthdays. Prince William and Catherine, they're very active on social media. Even King Charles and Queen Camilla, they have their own social media communications team. Not one member of the royal family had a positive word to say about Meghan Markle on her alleged 45th birthday.
It's entirely possible the smaller celebration reflected simple logistics rather than any deeper signal about friendship or standing. That said, if the reporting about an originally larger, more ambitious plan is accurate, the contrast between what was reportedly hoped for and what actually happened is worth noting honestly rather than ignoring. Before we get there, though, it's worth sitting with the birthday reporting specifically for a moment longer, because I think there's a genuinely human dimension to it that's easy to skip past in favor of the more dramatic framing. If the reporting about a scaled-back celebration is accurate, that's not necessarily evidence of some grand reputational collapse. It might simply reflect the ordinary reality that maintaining an extensive network of extremely high-profile friendships is genuinely difficult to sustain consistently over time. For essentially anyone, famous or not. Relationships naturally ebb and flow, priorities shift, and reading every quieter celebration as proof of social abandonment risks overstating what might simply be an unremarkable, entirely human pattern playing out at unusually high visibility. Now, here's the part of tonight's story that I genuinely think deserves the most careful and balanced treatment of everything we've covered so far, because it comes from a source with real, directly relevant credibility on this specific topic. Celebrity intelligence editor Dan Wakeford, someone who's reportedly been broadly sympathetic to Harry and Meghan's post-royal choices over the years, which matters for how you weigh this specific analysis, recently published what he's described as a scorecard, measuring the couple's original stated goals from their 2020 departure against where things actually stand 5 years later. His assessment, according to that analysis, breaks down into 5 specific categories: on titles and family access, reportedly maintained, with several visits to Charles since his cancer diagnosis and the recent private Highgrove meeting; on patronages, reportedly maintained selectively, with continued involvement in specific causes, including the upcoming Invictus Games; on private income, reportedly achieved but falling short of original projections, according to prior Celebrity Intelligence reporting on their production company and speaking engagement figures; on maintaining a self-directed schedule, reportedly fully achieved, with Harry moving between the US and UK largely on his own timeline; on the geographic living arrangement, reportedly achieved as originally sought, functionally based in America with periodic UK visits. By Wakeford's specific framing, that's 5 out of 5 original objectives reportedly met, even if achieved through a genuinely difficult and often publicly contentious path rather than smooth success. I genuinely think this specific analysis deserves real, serious consideration, precisely because it comes from someone without an obvious personal motive to deliberately make the couple look more successful than the underlying reporting would actually support if the facts genuinely pointed in a different direction entirely. At the same time, I think it's worth adding an important counterpoint that complicates the picture Wakeford's framework presents. Achieving specific structural goals, geographic freedom, a self-directed schedule, continued title and limited family access isn't necessarily the same thing as achieving genuine public standing, reputational health, or financial security at the scale originally anticipated. The commercial ventures underlying their income have reportedly underperformed relative to early projections. There's ongoing, genuinely significant legal exposure connected to the Sympathetic litigation we've covered previously on this channel. Public approval ratings, however imperfect a measure, have remained persistently difficult in the UK specifically. So it's genuinely entirely possible to hold both of these seemingly contradictory things as true simultaneously without any real inconsistency. That the specific structural objectives originally laid out back in 2020 have technically and verifiably been met according to Wakeford's own framework, while the broader overall picture of public standing, reputation, and genuine financial security remains considerably more precarious and considerably more uncertain than simple goal completion alone would ever suggest on its own. That's genuinely the more complicated, more honest read available here, I think. Not a clean, uncomplicated win by any means, and genuinely not a clean total failure either, but something considerably messier and more nuanced, sitting in the uncomfortable middle ground between those two easy, competing narratives that most coverage tends to default toward for the sake of a cleaner story. So where does all of this genuinely leave things once you pull together everything we've carefully walked through across tonight's entire breakdown? A disputed dinner party account that genuinely reveals more about the current state of public trust than it actually reveals about what specific words were said at that particular table. A genuinely minor food story that ended up receiving considerably outsized scrutiny simply and largely because of who happened to be involved in it. A real estate listing that genuinely raises fair, reasonable questions worth asking honestly, without actually confirming anything remotely definitive either way. Reported internal discussions about a possible future apology that remain genuinely speculative in nature, yet still entirely plausible given the surrounding context. A birthday celebration that reportedly may have shrunk considerably from its original, more ambitious planned scale and guest list. And finally, one genuinely credible, largely sympathetic analyst's honest assessment that the couple has technically achieved their stated 2020 goals, even while broader financial and reputational challenges genuinely remain largely unresolved at this specific point. None of these individual threads genuinely proves very much on its own when examined in isolation, and I think that's actually the most important honest takeaway from tonight's entire breakdown. Taken together, though, all of these individual threads genuinely paint a fairly consistent overall picture of a public figure navigating a genuinely persistent and difficult climate of ongoing scrutiny, one where even minor, entirely ordinary details, a stated cookie preference, a passing dinner conversation, a routine real estate mention, end up getting treated as potential evidence within a much larger, continuously unfolding narrative about credibility and public trust that extends well beyond any single individual story on its own. What do you genuinely think? Does Wakeford's specific scorecard analysis genuinely capture something real and meaningful about where things actually stand for this couple 5 years on? Or does that kind of technical, checkbox-style goal completion mean considerably less in practice than the broader, messier picture of ongoing financial and reputational struggle happening alongside it simultaneously? And separately, on the specific Martha Stewart account, do you genuinely find her particular version more credible given her long-established general reputation for bluntness and directness? Or does the competing explanation from Meghan's side genuinely deserve more benefit of the doubt than it's currently receiving in most of the online reaction? Let me know your genuinely honest take on all of this down in the comments below. I read every single response, and they genuinely do help shape which specific stories we decide to dig into next on this channel. And if you genuinely appreciate breakdowns like this one, the kind that actually try to hold multiple competing sides fairly in view rather than simply picking whichever version generates the most dramatic reaction, go ahead and subscribe to Palace Insider right now so you catch the very next one the moment it drops. And if tonight's video gave you something genuinely worth sitting with, whether or not you ended up agreeing with every single point made along the way, drop a like on your way out before you go. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing and reaching more people who care about getting the fuller, fairer picture rather than just the loudest headline.